There's lots of lines in a book that'll be memorable to you over a course of many, many years. But what are some opening lines that have always kind of stuck with me? Well, let's talk about them. Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back with another weird one today. We're going to be talking about some opening lines to novels and maybe short stories that I think have really just kind of stuck with me for years, or some rather modern ones that I think will stick with me for years, and why. Now, I want to make you understand right off the bat, guys, this isn't going to be a deep dive analysis about what these lines mean or anything like that. I'm not very good at that. I can just tell you, basically why they made me feel interested in things like that. And it's only going to be books that I've read. That's something else I want to get across. I know there's going to be a lot of, I can't believe you didn't do this one, this one, this one. I might not have read it, guys. So, and also, some of my favorite books, the opening line may not have been a banger, really. So that might be on here and you expect it a little bit. But I got, some of them are going to be a couple more than just the first line. I deal with it. It's just some things where it's like, I don't want to do like the opening paragraph, but if it's like 2 sentences, I might let it slide on here a little bit. Also, these are not going to be in preference order. I'm going to be going by oldest to newest because I think that will be the most fun way to do it. But I will let you know if there was one that I'm going to say is my favorite of all time. I'll let you know when I come across that one. Let's begin in 1813, guys. Yes, this is from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. This line is, "It is truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." And for me, what this means is kind of what my good pals John and Paul once said when they said, "I don't care too much for money because money, it can't buy me love." And I think that just goes to show that you can have all the money in the world if you don't have someone to share it with, it can be meaningless. So that's the kind of the way that I've always interpreted that line. And that is one that I was forced to read in high school and may not have had the best memories of it. I do really appreciate that line, and Miss Austen could write her ass off, no doubts about it. Next up, maybe the most famous and overused line in book history, to a point where I think it's almost become a parody of itself. And this, of course, is Edward George Bulwer Lytton's Paul Clifford in 1830. This goes, "It was a dark and stormy night." That was a line that everybody knows, but this actually is a lot longer than that. "It was a dark and stormy night. The rain fell in torrents, except at occasional intervals when it was checked by a violent gust of wind which swept up the streets, rattling along the housetops, and fiercely agitating the scantly flame of the lamps that struggled against the darkness." Just a fantastic line, guys. "It was a dark and stormy night." It's basically anytime you want to talk about opening a story, you'll hear somebody parody that line, and it all started right there in 1830. Like I said, you can't even watch like a cartoon these days without them parodying that line. Just very, very famous for a reason. How about 1859? We got to have some Charles Dickens on here, and I went with A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And yes, it's like the previous one. It is much longer than that, but that's the line that I think everyone knows. The full line is, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, and it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, and it was the winter of despair." Man, was Charles Dickens really, really talented, or what? I mean, best of times, worst of times, I think that's just one that you just gotta always go back and think, if you're going to be recollecting a long span of history or story in your personal life, you can obviously think of the highs and the lows. No way says it better than Dickens said it there in 1859. I really didn't think it was that old until I looked it up. How about 1865 here? And this is going to be Lewis Carroll, which I just read about this time last year. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And it says, "Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversation?" And why that one stuck to me is because I just think about when I made that transition in my life from reading books that had illustrations and a lot of pictures in it to being just words. That's kind of what that line has always made me think of, really, when I think about The Hobbit being the first book I read with absolutely no pictures in it. So it's always been one that's kind of personal to me. Again, guys, I know that this might not be what some of these lines mean, but that's just kind of the way that I think. But let's move along now. This is 1872. This is the great and mighty Jules Verne, the author that really first opened my imagination. This is from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and it says, the year 1866 was signalized by a remarkable incident, a mysterious and puzzling phenomenon, which doubtless no one has yet forgotten. What an opener. Right away, you're like, okay, well, what happened in 1866? I've got to find out. This is what we call a hook. And, when you talk about a hook and you talk about what's going on in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I think you'll see there might be a little bit of a really bad pun in there somewhere. But, yeah, Jules Verne, the guy was just brilliant. And he knew how to set the stage, really, for you were about to read something magnificent. So buckle up, my friends. How about 1884? I think Mark Twain was incredibly ahead of his time, especially with this line from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He says, you don't know me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth, mainly. What I like about this is it almost feels just absolutely the most meta thing that I think had ever been written at that point in history, where he's almost like breaking the fourth wall and acknowledging the author. I thought it was just such a clever way to open that story when you're like, okay, you've heard it from this point of view, but let's hear it from this point of view now. And it's just a charming story. I think that no matter how old it is great, and that just kind of opens you up for that sense of adventure you're going to go on with this guy one more time. And Mark Twain, just great author and just a hoot. I think his stuff is just hilarious to go back to and read now in the best way. How about a little horror here? We got to go back to 1923, and this, of course, is H.P. Lovecraft. This is from The Lurking Fear, and the line: there was thunder in the air on the night I went to the desert mansion atop Tempest Mountain to find lurking fear. With me in horror, you've got to set the tone really early, and Lovecraft usually set the tone pretty good in his opening paragraph. I know some people think he's kind of flowery, or whatever term they use, but I always think he had that great way of just delivering that sense of dread right away. And I think with that line, that's the one that always sticks with me, because I'm like, well, what is lurking fear? What is it? Got to find out. And with Lovecraft, always his thing was the fear of the unknown. And right away, you're like, well, what is this? I got to find out. But be careful what you ask for when it comes to Lovecraft, right? How about 1936 here, guys? This is Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, one of my favorite books ever. And it says, Scarlett O'Hara was not beautiful, but men seldom realized it when caught by her charm, as the Charlton twins were. And I think if this is someone who saw the movie first, like I did, and you saw Scarlett O'Hara was a beautiful woman. So I think what this is kind of setting up in the book is what I've said about what makes Scarlett O'Hara such a thrilling protagonist, is that she is not particularly likable, like at all, but she gets by on her charm, and she gets by on her determination and getting things done. And I think that that's what I just grew to love about that character, is that no matter the circumstance, no matter the odds, she got shit done. And this goes to show that it wasn't just because she was pretty and batting eyelashes at people. She got stuff done. And you know what? I'd like to say a lot of times, charm will get you everywhere. It really will. It'll help you cut some corners. That and blue eyes. At least that's what I've been told. How about 1937, guys? Maybe the greatest opening line in the history of fantasy, and the one that opened the door to me in many ways to that hole in the ground. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. This is it, guys. That is the line to begin all adventures, right? And it just right away, it's like, well, what is going on here? I mean, I was just hooked from the first moment I heard that line. And it's just fantastic. And it's just something that I don't think will ever be matched. I don't think I'll ever be able to match something with a opening sentence that short ever again in a fantasy book, and just have you right away be like, all right, I want to know what in the world this world is all about. How about some 1949 here? And going to play on words here. It was written in 1949, but we're talking about 1984. This is George Orwell, and I think this line just electric. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Right off the bat, you're like, What does that mean? Are we talking about like the doomsday clock? What is this? I think it's just talking about the things had changed. This isn't the world that you know. This is the world that's going to be. And we're like, okay, so do the clocks go to 13 now? When we talk about the events that led to this moment, it's just such a great opening line that has you asking so many questions right off the bat. And as you read further in the book, you see, this is very different than the world that we're living in, right? And I think that he just nails it with that opening line. I can't say enough about it. When the strikes are the clocks are striking 13. That's really, really good. How about a kid's book? I do got some kids books on here, guys. 1952 by E.B. White. This is from Charlotte's Web, and I love this. Where's Papa going with that axe? I could think of many horror stories that might have opened this way. And you know what? As someone who's terrified of spiders, Charlotte's Web might be a light horror story in a way. I kept waiting for that spider to turn. It's a really kick-ass opening line because, if you've read it, you know where Papa was going with that axe. But it really raises the eyebrows when you start a kid's book and it starts with a line like that. Another one I think I read as a child. I still think that this is great for all ages, but a lot of people cut their fantasy teeth on C.S. Lewis. And this one is a particular favorite of mine from 1952, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. One thing I'll say about going back and reading Lewis as an adult is, you can see where this was aimed at younger audiences, and a lot of people might have problems with some of his allegory and stuff like that. But one thing that you would never find a lack of in a C.S. Lewis story is charm. The man was just oozing with charm. And reading his stories is just magical for me for that reason. I'll always be transported back to, being a 7-8-year-old kid reading these books. The illustrated editions, I think that's why I don't count it as, the first books I read that didn't have words in them. And an opening line like that, especially if you know about Eustace Scrubb, what kind of character he starts off as, it's very, very fitting. And the way that Lewis can make us look at his characters in that way was always great with the way that he wrote his prose. Just such an amazing, amazing author. How about 1953? One of my favorite authors of all time. This is Ray Bradbury. And one of my favorite books of all time, Fahrenheit 451. Very simple line. It was a pleasure to burn. Now, the thing with Fahrenheit 451 as well as 1984 is you'll always find yourself saying, with what's going on in the world right now, this isn't very much speculative fiction anymore. Thing is generation before mine said that. The generation before that said that. That's something that I think everyone will always apply to their own generation of what's going on in the world, things like that. Lots of censorship and stuff that make people think, okay, how far are we away from burning books? Because we're erasing things. So I think every generation will always kind of just, coalesce around this book in 1984 whenever they want to kind of complain about the way that society is heading. But there's so much more to Fahrenheit 451, guys. Ray Bradbury was so ahead of the curve, and that line really just... it was a barn burner, wasn't it? How about 1953? Let's stay in 1953 here. Now, this was actually written much earlier, but it wasn't published until 1953. This is by the great Robert E. Howard, Texas's own Robert E. Howard. This is from The Frost Giant's Daughter, and I love this. The clangor of swords had died away. The shouting of the slaughter was hushed. Silence lay on the red-stained snow. Now, why I like this, guys, is to me, that just sets up this world of Conan, the freaking barbarian, right? This is the guy that's going to get stuff done, and you're probably going to end up missing some limbs by the end. And thinking about that blood on the snow is obviously just going to be something that just pops visually in your head. Again, one of the best opening lines from a Conan story for me, like I said, because it just kind of sets the tone of what you're going to be reading here. Conan's going to crack some heads, and you're going to see it. He's not going to kind of shy away from it. What a great, great writer that man was, as was Shirley Jackson in 1959 when she wrote The Haunting of Hill House. What I said earlier about horror, about setting the tone right away, this always grabbed me. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. And something I said that when I talked about Edgar Allan Poe is I love that he was actually so good at showing that fine line between being so scared that you're going insane. You're grasping reality. You're grasping reality and your sanity by a thread. And that's what that line makes me think of, something that Poe would have written. But Shirley Jackson, what a horror icon. And that it all started with that story right there for me. And it's just a great opening line. It's actually a little longer. That's actually a little semicolon that goes a little longer than that. But that's the part of the line that always really sticks with me. How about Harper Lee and To Kill a Mockingbird 1960? And a lot of people won't think this is a great opening line, but it was a good hook for me the first time I read it. When he was nearly 13, my brother Jim got his arm badly broken at the elbow. So right away, I'm like, what does this have to do with killing a mockingbird? I had no idea what this book was about, but I wanted to keep reading to find out, okay, well, how did her brother break his arm? What happened? What got them into this situation? And then I read the whole book in a night as a teenager. So I remember when I got that book, it was, okay, guys, we want you to read the first 2 chapters over the weekend, and we're going to talk about it on Monday. And I read the whole book that night because that's just one of the greatest books ever written right there. One of the best coming-of-age novels that you'll ever read, guys. It's fantastic if you haven't read it. And so that line, like I said, it was just really, okay, well, I want to find out what happened here. What mischief did these kids get into? So me being the coming-of-age guy, yeah, it was always one of the big reasons right there was this book and that line. So I'll always be partial to it, as I will with 1969 and Kurt Vonnegut. This is Slaughterhouse 5, and I like this is very simple. All this happened, more or less. So I think it's one of those when you're going to take a reader on a journey. I think it's good to get that question out of the way right away. Hey, did this really happen, or is this like all in the head of the protagonist here? Well, all of it happened, more or less. So I think it's just a great, almost kind of sarcastic opening line, and it's that book goes to crazy town in great ways, and so I think that you couldn't have had a better opening line for that one than this. How about 1973 William Goldman? This is The Princess Bride. Now this is a crazy line because I feel like I've said something similar. It says, this is my favorite book in all the world, though I have never read it. And I think it's because with me, I will buy books I've never read and buy authors that I just know I'm going to love. I'll give you an example. I knew I was going to love John Gwynne. I had never read a single book by him, and I bought 7 of his books. For some reason, sometimes you just know you're going to click with an author. I can't explain it. You call it a gut instinct. Have no idea. There's some stuff you're like, well, I hope I like it. And then there's stuff like, I'm not even worried about it. I know I'm going to love this. So that's what that line always kind of meant to me. And man, am I due for a reread of Princess Bride. I would love to read that again. How about Douglas Adams? The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. We're into the 80s here, 1980. This is book number 2 in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He says, in the beginning, the universe was created, and this has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move. What I love about Adams is the man could make any sentence end in a joke, and it landed every single time. And that line always just cracks me up because you got to ask yourself a lot of times, did whoever created this universe here, they ever regret it? So I love how you would talk about breaking the fourth wall to talk to the reader, man. Douglas Adams was the best at it. Okay, guys, 1982. You're making me pick a favorite opening line of all time. This is it. This is The Gunslinger. Dark Tower number 1 by Stephen King. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. For some reason, to me, that is it, like a hole in the ground. There lived a hobbit, where I'm like, okay, what is going on? Who is this man in the black, and why is our, I believe, protagonist chasing him across this desert? What's going on? What are they doing? So it's just an incredible line. And I know some people are like, I don't get what you get out of it. And that's fine. These are always going to be subjective for sure. But that line right there just grabbed me like nothing else when I was 19 years old, which wasn't a coincidence, I don't think. 19 being a very big part of the Dark Tower. Read it and find out. But there's a lot of people reading that starting in January 19th, by the way, on my Discord. If you haven't read Dark Tower and you're looking for a reason to do it, join the Discord. Lots of people are going to be reading 1 per month. And I think that you guys should do it because everyone should take that journey to the tower with Roland and gang. And they all need to start with the gunslinger chasing that man in black. It's just such an incredible line. I also like this one from 1985. This is by my vampire queen, Miss Anne Rice. Rest in peace, my dear. I am the vampire Lestat, and I'm immortal, more or less. The light of the sun, the sustained heat of an intense fire, these things might destroy me. But then again, they might not. And if you know anything about Lestat, this is a guy who basically will spit in the face of death. This is a guy who's going to put his balls on the line. He's just going to go out there and he's going to be like, look, this is what I am. Do something about it. And it's just why I think that makes him such a lovable protagonist or someone that you love to hate. Is if you're going to get intense reactions towards Lestat, Either way, personally, I love him. I think he's one of the greatest vampires in the history of fiction. So, yeah, that opening line right there is like, yeah, sure, this is going to kill every other vampire. Maybe not me though, because I'm me. That's just a guy. That's a guy. That's the dude right there. I love him. And Anne Rice just wrote an incredible character, and I can't believe she's left us. How about 1986? Here, sticking with a little bit of horror. It's Clive Barker with The Hellbound Heart. And this line really hooked me when I picked this up first time. It said, so intent was Frank upon solving the puzzle of Lamarchan's box that he didn't hear the great bell begin to ring. I'm like, what? What is going on? What is Lamarchan? What is this box? What bell do we hear ringing? Now, if you read the book, you know what's going on here. But man, it just sets the tone right away. Again, a horror book has to set the tone immediately. And if you can do it with that first line, you have just hit a grand slam. And I think Clive Barker did hit a grand slam with that one for sure. If you're going to read one Clive Barker book, guys, read that one because it's like 100 pages. You can read it in an afternoon, and it is a page turner, and it's fantastic. How about The Master of Horror? I got this 2 Stephen King ones on here. You guys can't be surprised. 1986. This is my second favorite book of all time, guys. This is it. And it says, the terror, which would not end for another 28 years, if it ever did end, began so far as I know and can tell with a boat made from a sheet of newspaper floating down a gutter swollen with rain. What in the world is going on here, right? So, I mean, I had seen the miniseries before I read it the first time. That was really what was my gateway, so I knew what was going on. But again, that's an incredible hook. I'm like, well, okay, what's happened in 28 years? And what does a paper boat have to do with it? So, yeah, just great stuff, guys. So, I think that might be the best opening chapter to a horror book of all time. It's just amazing. And I can't say enough stuff about that book. It's just, it starts incredibly and it ends even more. So, I've reviewed that book on this channel 3 times now, guys. So, you know how dear it is to me, and it all started with that amazing line right there. About 1990, guys, into the 1990s here with Robert Jordan, and this is book number 1 of the Wheel of Time, The Eye of the World. Now, I know most people think I'm going to talk about the Wheel of Time turns and ages coming past, right? No, that's chapter 1. You got to start with the prologue. We were talking about line number 1 here, and it says, the palace still shook occasionally as the earth rumbled in memory, groaned as if it would deny what had happened. To me, that was the ultimate hook for the fact I was like, what happened? What's going on? What are we talking about? What memory is this? What just tore this place apart? And that is one of the wildest prologues you will ever read. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's just so confusing. I didn't know why it was happening, but I felt like I could understand what was happening. But that line right there was like, all right, I'm ready to settle down and buckle up for this 15-book journey here, right? And just, yeah, what a great opening. And then, of course, chapter 1's, the Wheel of Time turns, ages come to pass. Incredible line as well. But we're talking about just the first line here. And we're going to do the same with 1997 and J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I love Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. I love when an author is playful with their audience. When they start off a book like this, I'm already like, okay, these are some uppity folks. They're quite snarky, right? So again, I read this after I saw the first movie. That's actually what made me read the first 4 Harry Potter books, is when I saw that first movie. But yeah, that right there is right away like, okay, she's setting the tone about these Dursleys and they don't know what's going on in their street, and you know what? They don't care because they're too normal to deal with all this hullabaloo going on outside their street right now. So I just find it I love a good, charming line that can be just kind of playful with their audience. That's one of my favorite ones. And I appreciate a good ripper as your first line, like this one. Clash of Kings in 1998 by George R.R. Martin. This says, the comet's trail spread across the dawn, a red slash that bled above the crags of Dragonstone like a wound in the pink and purple sky. How vivid is that, man? God, this guy was on fire when he was writing those first 3 books. He was just electric with his descriptions. I know he doesn't get a lot of credit for his prose, but stuff like that right there, I'm like, you just painted an absolutely incredible opening picture in my mind with that line. So, yeah, man, that's just... what a great book, man. Clash of Kings is just up there as some of the best of them ever. And that line, it just blows away the opening lines of all the other books, which have great lines as well. How about Neil Gaiman? Now, there's a lot of Neil Gaiman fans out there. This is 1999 and Stardust, which I just read last year. There was once a young man who wished to gain his heart's desire. To me, that is the perfect opening for a fantasy book, right? You're going to have boy leaves home, right? He goes on an adventure. That just sets up a classic fantasy. And this one almost in a fairy tale kind of way. So I love the opening chapter of that book and how it really just sets up that this is going to be a magical fantasy adventure. And you're just going to come along for the ride. So very, very classic, charming opening there that really makes you think, hey, I'm going on an adventure with this young boy. I love it. Okay, and you want to talk about some humor here. Now, when you got some good humor in a rather serious book. Now, look, this is a Dresden Files book, okay? And I know a lot of people don't think Dresden Files is serious. Dresden Files is fun. Dresden Files is funny. It has some humor in it, but it has some very, very serious stuff in it. I know a lot of people who haven't gotten far in the series don't look at it that way. So when you can open your book with a line in a very, very serious moment like this and make me chuckle right away, like, okay, Harry's back, and what mischief is he into? He says, the building was on fire, and it wasn't my fault. That has got to be the most fun opening line to any Dresden book ever. And I know that a lot of people want to say, well, what about changes? Well, I'm not going to talk about changes because that opening line is a spoiler, and I wouldn't do that to anybody. It's pretty good, but to me, it's not on the level with this one because that was a shocker. This one is just straight like, all right, I'm back with Harry. What shit has he got himself into this time, and how is he going to get out of it? That's always a lot of fun. Now then we get into some of the epics here, guys. 2010, we're almost to real time here. This is by Brandon Sanderson, and I got to talk about The Way of Kings, maybe the most incredible prologue I've read in a fantasy book here. And right off the bat, you're like, what in the world did I just step into? Zeth Sanson Villano, truthless of Shinovar, wore white on the day he was to kill a king. Holy shit, that is electric, man. That right there is like, okay, I don't know what kind of name that is. I don't know what truthless means. I don't know what Shinovar is. I don't know what he's talking about wearing white to kill a king, but holy hell do I want to find out. That is an incredible opening line, guys. I can't say enough about that line. That's just magnificent. And that prologue, holy hell, it just completely just ripped open my mind's eye with what was going on in that prologue. I had no idea some of the things that he was talking about, but holy hell, I wanted to find out. Just electric opening right there. And that line is just so good. And I know I probably said San Villano wrong, but hey, that's how I've always said it. How about 2011 here? As much as I love a good, fancy, just incredible prose or something a little humorous, how about one that's just straight up deviant behavior? You got to talk about Andy Weir's The Martian with I'm pretty much fucked. I mean, that kind of sets the tone for what kind of story you're going to be reading there and seeing what kind of trouble our hero is in at the beginning of that story. In the end, guys, I'll always be 12, and I would find a line like that very, very funny. So nothing classic or whatever, but it did make me, like I said, when I opened it, kind of be like, oh, okay, well, this is what we're doing with this book, right? Like I said, when I talked about that Jay Kristoff book, guys, I like some bad language. It's going to happen sometimes. How about, let's see here, 2014. This is by Pierce Brown. It is the opening to Red Rising. I would have lived in peace, but my enemies brought me war. Now, I've not hidden the fact that I think the Red Rising is an absolutely magnificent series, and everyone should read it, and I think it's just wonderful, but I thought the first book was mediocre. I thought it was just okay. However, that line right there made me want to keep reading. That is awesome. Okay, so this guy's completely happy, just living his life, but his enemies are pulling him into war. Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. It kind of gives me that kind of feeling. And yeah, that's just an awesome opening line. And I can't think of very many, from modern sci-fi that I've read that are better than that one. That's just a kick-ass opening line. How about 2018 here? This is Chris Verrocchio and the Empire of Silence. This is Sun Eater number 1. It says, the light of that murdered sun still burns me. Yeah, so what happened to the sun? What's going on here? How did this sun get murdered? That's something very interesting right off the bat. But you will see, if you guys have read that, or if you hopefully do give it a shot, is that Verrocchio continues to wow you with words that whole series, and starting with that line right there. That, I'm going to find out that some crazy stuff has happened in this universe. And this is the last one, guys, here. This is from last year, 2021. This is from the aforementioned Jay Kristoff's Empire of the Vampire. And he said, it was the 27th year of Day's death in the realm of the Forever King, and his murderer was waiting to die. So what the hell's Day's death? What's going on here? So yeah, it's something that I think that you'll be asking yourself a lot while reading that book. Day's death sounds very, very interesting. And then, of course, what is the Forever King, and who is his murderer waiting to die? So you guys really should read that book and find out why. So that, again, for me, the best thing about an opening line, guys, is if it gets you interested to go, okay, well, I've got 3-4 questions right away just from this opening line, and I want to find out. Not like, this is going to be some pretentious stuff that I'm not going to know what anything means, but more of the, hey, I'm interested now in going on. So guys, that was 33 of them. 33 of my favorite lines. I'm sure I forgot some. This is really going off recent memory and stuff, so I had to really dig deep for some of these. I kind of went through my library and opened the first page of some books and was surprised of some of my favorite books. First line was just all right. There wasn't anything special about it, but these lines I think have always kind of stuck with me, or the more recent ones probably will stick with me for a long time to come. But I'm interested in hearing you guys' favorites. Drop in the comments and let me know some of them. Do you have a problem with any of these? Hey, that's fine. Again, like I said, reading might be the most subjective thing on the planet, especially when you're talking about the opening line of a book and how it hooked you. But hey, drop in the comments. Let me know some of your favorites. I can't wait to read them. I'll talk to you there.